I'm going to review 5 Nintendo Switch games that cost me a total of 15 cents. Now I've been well known to go into the eShop dumpster to find cheap games to see if they're worth the small price I paid for it. And these are by far some of the cheapest games I've ever bought for the Switch. I have done this type of video before, but that was a special one. It was my 999th video, which was about 3 years ago. In that one I reviewed 20 games and I only spent $2. This time all the games will be coming from the same company, Druggist Games. Since I had bought their games in the past for the other eShop dumpster reviews, or that 20 game special, they offered me crazy prices on most of their games, some as cheap as a penny. Now there were about 20 or so to choose from, and I decided to vary the genre. There's a platformer, a puzzle game, a horror adventure game, a visual novel, and whatever the call Funny Bunny Adventure. It's sort of a platformer, but also a puzzle game, but it's not really either of those things. You'll see when I get to it. Now, just like my 20 games video, I'm not going to use a buy, sale, or skip system. I'm going to go with thumbs up or thumbs down. It's just simpler that way. Now, I've decided to review these games from most expensive to least. And I mean what it cost me. Let's see if any of these games have some redeeming value. Swordbreaker. This is a choose-your-own-adventure visual novel. They give you multiple paths to make it to the top of the tower. It starts out with a really nice voiceover explaining the plot. It's always better to hear the dialogue in a voiceover, as the different inflections in the voice can really change the way the line is written. Imagine my surprise when, after this, nothing is voiced. And that was really disappointing. Now this is a T-rated game, but for a T-rated game, it has to be edging that line to M-rated. Look at the description in the rating. It has blood, violence, and partial nudity. I assume this is the scene they're talking about. You didn't actually think I would show it, did you? I would say it was very risque and unexpected. In fact, all the sexualized parts of this really seemed out of place. The tone of the scenes would change wildly. You might be in a medieval setting, then all of a sudden an alien ship would show up. I wish it would just stick with one idea and run with it. The trip through the castle, while it did have some interesting turns, it started to feel like the same idea over and over again. You're often going to run into someone, and then you should just almost always just talk to them. More times than not, they're going to be friendly and help you. In fact, it happened so many times, it wasn't really a surprise after the third time. Sometimes you might make a good impression with the people that you talk to, so they might help you in a different room. So it's always good to make friends. You will occasionally run into a fight, and it's often just dodging the first time, then attack. Or it could be rushing them and dodging. It was usually just a variation of that. There are over 300 scenes, and a third of them were death scenes. You get 3 deaths until it's game over. The biggest problem is that you're going to need to redo scenes over and over again, and it will be easy because you know the answer to everything. So it's not hard to get to the end, but it's going to take a few tries to get there. I think there are a few endings to this game. I got the one where I married the princess, but if the map is any indication, it looks like there's 3 endings. Now this is normally $4.99, and I think that's a fair price. It has a lot of replayability if you want to take different routes, and it can be funny at times due to the absurdity. Breathing Fear. This is a horror point-and-click adventure game, only done very poorly. You play as an escaped prisoner, and you find a house and decide to explore it and the grounds. You need to find your way to get out of the area, and how you do this is some of the most convoluted ways of doing it. It would put the King's Quest series to shame. You're free to go wherever you want, but things have to be done in a certain order. If your heartbeat goes above 70 beats, you will die, which in itself is nuts. 70 beats a minute is a normal adult heart rate. What's even more crazy is you start out with a heart rate of 20 beats a minute, which is extremely low and more dangerous than the spooky house. You would think a guy on the run would have a much higher heart rate. You can find food and drinks which will take your heart rate even lower. You have a flashlight with some of the worst batteries I've seen in a while, and you're going to need to keep your flashlight on as much as possible, because if you don't have it on, that's when your heartbeat goes up. Or you might get jump scares that'll take your heartbeat up. You can pick up more batteries in the house, but the game expects you to do things in an unknowable order, and you can't get ahead of things. For example, you might see some firewood, but you can't pick it up until you have some need for it. Normally, adventure games let you pick up whatever you want, assuming you can find a use for it later. But since the game has to be done in a certain order, it never explains to you why you have to wait to pick it up. So you're going to have to do a lot of backtracking to escape this place. I do not understand these gameplay decisions. It's made it so you need to know what you're doing before you even start playing. Even when you have to find a code for a puzzle, they randomize the code every time, so you can't use previous knowledge. So you're actually going to have to go through the steps in order to get those codes. And that was so tedious. This was not fun to play, and it got boring quick. And even at the low price of $4.99, I would just say skip it. There are so many better, scary point-and-click adventure games for the Switch. One Person Story. This is a puzzle game with some outstanding voice work in it. It tells the story of a person's life and its trials and tribulations. It does this by having you control blockades that are stopping a bouncing ball. I know that must sound strange, but it's actually very compelling. The puzzles were not too hard. They do get tricky towards the end, but with enough trial and error, you will get it down. Now, like I mentioned, I really like the voiceover. I think she does a good job of keeping a calm environment while telling the story.
We're born and start our journey. But life always has obstacles. Be an opener of life doors. To live, we must keep moving. Life is not straightforward.
You will understand what she's getting at without her straight out saying any of the details. It's not a very long game, and if you're good at doing the puzzles, you can beat it in about an hour or so. The puzzles will have you opening panels for a ball. You're going to have to adjust when you need to lower the panels for the ball, and to allow the spikes to go away before the ball gets there. Or you might need to use that ball to break a new path for the story. You will get unlimited tries to beat the area that you're in, and it resets fast, so it's just a matter of figuring out the correct timing. It's a very clever way to tell a story with such minimal gameplay options. It didn't overstay its welcome, and it was very fun and challenging to the end. And for only $2.99 normally, I'd say this is an easy recommendation. It's not something you're going to replay, but it's a fun little game to play once. Funny Bunny Adventure. This was a very strange game. It's kind of a farming, platforming, stealth puzzle game? It feels like they threw a bunch of ideas into a blender and nothing interesting came out of it. Out of all the games I played, this is the one that feels the most like it was just a mobile game that was ported to the Switch. It has the chaos of a mobile game that just needs to keep people's attention. The story is about a rabbit whose family hasn't got enough food for winter, so he decides to grow it into a field, which just happens to be the home of a witch. Well, the rabbit calls her a witch. I have to assume it's just the homeowner, and this annoying rabbit won't stop bothering her and her land. The gameplay is like this. You will maneuver throughout the map, finding plots of land to hop over, which will plant the carrots. And once you find all the growable plots of land, the carrots will sprout up, and then you have to go back to collect them again. Once you do, the level is over. You'll be avoiding all kinds of characters, from a witch, to a cow, to a leprechaun, which will destroy plots of land so you can't plant carrots on them. You're going to need to find his gold to stop him. There were even times where you need to find a fairy, which would take you to a mini game for some reason. The minigame would have you match up produce in a Bejeweled type game. And if you found them all, you would win the minigame and then you would go back to collecting your carrots. I think this was made for younger children, but I think even them would find this too boring to play. It tried to do too much and failed to make the gameplay interesting. Everything in the game world was just too busy looking. It felt like they added in so many visuals with no regard for actually playing the game. It was just too much to look at, and I doubt it would keep a child's interest. Even at $4.99, I wouldn't even bother. It tried to add in all kinds of gimmicks without making the core gameplay fun to play. Deor. The story is told to you in one of the worst fonts I've ever seen in a game. I was playing this on a 55-inch TV, and I couldn't read any of it. It wasn't until I actually watched the footage that I recorded that I pieced together what the plot was. Apparently a guy down on his luck has lost all of his money and has become ill. And while being brought to the hospital, he died and went to purgatory? I assume that's what's happening. It said there were inmates in this place. The story makes no sense. I know what you must be thinking. Well, I'm sure the ending wraps up the story in a satisfying conclusion. No, it did not. This is the final screen. The end. The cloud on the end, is that supposed to suggest that he went to heaven after he got enough gold coins? Which in itself is problematic. You have to buy your way into heaven? Was this all just a dream he had on the way to the hospital? Note to the creators of games out there, if you're going to bother making a backstory to your game, actually pay it off in the end. The visuals were very basic. This feels like it was made with a Game Maker program, and they just used whatever they had in it. The puzzles got harder as you might expect, but it really was all about knowing the right order to drop the boxes in. Because that's what the gameplay is, dropping boxes so you can get to all the coins. The biggest problem with this title is the lack of a tutorial. There was one level where you wouldn't even have a clue how to beat it unless you paid attention to the control list. There were bombs you could use, but the game never explains how to use them. Usually games would explain how it works by showing you how to use it in the world. But this one has a hidden attack and it never bothers to explain how to use it. You have unlimited tries to beat the levels, so it's just a matter of trying everything until you get it. There really isn't any challenge to the game, and it's over after 50 levels, and you get the great "the end" screen. There really isn't any new ideas after the first few levels, with the exception of the change in scenery. The addition of lava pools was the biggest change. Now, this isn't a bad game, it's just a pretty average one. It feels like something that someone made at a video game camp. Now, this is normally $2.99, and this was a hard one. The lack of a tutorial and the fact that you could beat this game in about 45 minutes makes me say you should just skip it. Sure, it was worth the penny that I paid for it, but it's not the kind of game I would ever go back and play again. Well, it looks like 2 out of the 5 games would be worth your money at full price. And that's not great. But I was happy finding a couple gems in the lot. If you like these group reviews, I might do them more often. I do have to get around to doing that mega review of Sabek Games. The same people who made that classic Popeye game for the Switch, which apparently you can't even buy anymore. I'm sure there's a collective, "aw darn" to everyone who hadn't gotten it yet. Well, thank you all for watching.